Welcome to part 2 of our lecture about different forms and formats. So let's move on to different formats or styles for recording our documentation. This slide here just gives a quick overview of some of the different types of documentation systems that are in use, and we're going to talk about these in detail coming up. Charting by exception is a common format in nursing homes. And then also here at our local Chatham-Kent Health Alliance. When you are charting by exception, you are only documenting when something is outside the normal ranges. So for instance, at a nursing home facility, they'll be charting all of their daily assessments on flow sheets, and only if something is out of the normal do they actually go into the progress note and to document it. That way in the progress note it's not being quickly filled up with everything that's normal, and it saves a lot of time because flow sheets are really quick to chart on. At the Chatham-Kent Health Alliance, they're still charting by exception, but they do it a little bit different. You still have to do your head-to-toe assessment, but if the head-to-toe assessment of a body system, so your respiratory or your cardiovascular or your peripheral vascular, if it meets the criteria that's listed in their norms assessment, then you just chart within normal limits, and that's all that you need to chart for that area. If there is something, any one thing that is not the same of what is normal, then you would chart within normal limits except, and then you need to go on into detail what it is that is the exception. Is their breathing rate faster than normal? Do they have edema in their lower extremities? So charting by exception. Helps to save time by reducing repetition, and the whole facility has to use that same approach. Actually, that's for any style of documentation. It's mandated by the facility. So here is a copy of the page of norms that is used by the Chatham-Kent Health Alliance in their charting by exception format. So if we have a closer look here at our cardiovascular system, it says that they have a regular pulse. It ranges between 50 to 100 per minute. The peripheral pulses are palpable. There's no edema, no calf tenderness if monitored. Then you would see normal sinus rhythm. If there's any deviation from that, then I would be charting within normal limits except, and I would be going into greater detail as far as what was abnormal. Narrative charting is very common. It's an older style of charting. It's like a story. You start it from beginning to end, and you are charting everything, your whole head-to-toe assessment, your IV, the patient's reports, everything. And so that it's kind of a chronological order of what happened during the day. The problem with the narrative format is that it tends to be very long. It's very detailed, but it's very long, which makes it time-consuming. And then it also is lengthy to scan through if you're trying to find out from reading people's past chartings as far as how long this certain problem has been present. So I'm going to let you read through this particular narrative example. Notice that some of the lines don't really line up with this app. So again, just go back to your original PowerPoint notes so that things line up properly. Care maps or critical pathways are a format where you've got routine care and that they've got standardized care plans. And so that sometimes it's just one discipline that's being used, as the example that's in my next slide. And sometimes there is room for multiple disciplines, from pre-admitting office all the way through to the operative day to the post-operative day, and it lists all of the details as far as labs, diets, tests, etc., any kind of routine care. It will include key interventions and expected outcomes. The whole healthcare team, if it's multidisciplinary, will be using it and referring back to it. And documentation in the progress notes is only done when it's outside, falls outside the norms. Otherwise, you're putting check marks or initials to say that they've met and it's falling within normal. So again, it's one method to standardize care and help to abbreviate the amount of charting that is done in routine care and standardized care plans. So I'll let you have a closer look. This is a care path that the CCAC, or Community Care Access Center in Chatham, had used. And it was for nursing when they were visiting a client that was in the hospital for cardiac and required some cardiac monitoring once they were home again. So they had a standard for visits unless there were unresolved issues, and it outlines what the nurse needed to do in visit 1 and 2, what the nurse needed to do in visit 3, and again what the nurse needed to do in visit 4. So that you initial when it was completed to the box to the right. If you had additional, if it was outside of normal, that's when they would need to chart into a progress note. So care paths. We said that narrative notes were an old style of documenting. Some of the more recent ones are using a combination of flow sheets and problem-oriented documentation. And so that, again, you've got your databases, your problem lists. If they have a care plan, such as care plan or care path, that would be in there, and that you are documenting in the progress note under a different format. So sometimes it's SOAPy or PI or DAR, and we'll look at each of those. And so again, you're only then documenting in the progress notes for specific problems. All of the other data is listed on flow sheets. The most common formats for documenting the information in the progress notes are SOAP or SOAPy, PI, or DAR. And we're going to have a closer look at each one of these. So SOAPy stands for Subjective Objective Assessment, Plan, Intervention, and Evaluation. And so the subjective and objective are where we are writing our data, and they're separating it out into subjective and objective data. The assessment is actually from that data, what is the appropriate nursing diagnosis that we are focusing on? So what is the problem that we're focusing on? And it's written in the format of a nursing diagnosis. What the caregiver plans to do. The intervention is what was actually done, and the evaluation is looking to see the effectiveness or the patient's response. Again, note that some of the lines and shifting has moved with this app, so do look at your original PowerPoint notes. But notice that there is a specific, just a date and time of entry, and thus in order to meet standards, I need to indicate date and time of the event. So my subjective data, my objective data, which you can assume is also at the same time. My assessment is actually my nursing diagnosis. In this case, it's ineffective breathing pattern related to respiratory muscle fatigue. What is my plan? What were my interventions? And again, ignore this line. Things are just not lining up. So just go back to your original PowerPoint for a proper lining up of things. And my evaluation. The patient states in quotations, I feel better. My objective data, my respiratory rate was 20 per minute, and my respirations were unlabored. Noting that at the end of your documentation is when you write your signature and your designation. You don't do it at the end of each little section. So that's SOAPy, and sometimes it's just SOAP. The PI format just has... PI is another format for documenting just the problem assessments in the progress notes, and there isn't even any data that is written in the progress notes. All of the data is belonging in the flow sheets elsewhere, and this is to avoid duplication. So they just have the identified nursing problem, what was done, and what was the evaluation. So again, very short and sweet. So again, the lining, it didn't line up the same way, so do have a look at how it's written in your PowerPoint notes. But again, you've got your date and time of the actual charting. We've got our intervention time as far as what was done to let us know when it happened. Ineffective breathing pattern related to respiratory muscle fatigue is my nursing diagnosis. My intervention, my evaluation, and signing and documenting. So same kind of a thing, only all of the data you need to go back to the actual flow sheets to see. And in this case, you can also have like a head-to-toe assessment flow sheet, not just ins and outs or bowel movements or food. So the assessment is all clumped in one area. You're just documenting the problem areas in the progress notes. That's PI. DAR is another very common one. Sometimes it's written as DAR, data action response, or sometimes the R is E because of your evaluation. You're essentially monitoring the same thing. Sometimes there's DARE, in which the evaluation is more like a long-term plan, what's next type of a thing. And with the DAR format, they have their nursing diagnosis written as a focus up at the very top. At Children's Hospital of Michigan, we used our DAR format, and at the front of all of the progress notes was a list of nursing diagnoses that were pertinent to that patient. And so you picked at the end of your shift whichever problems were an issue, either improved or worsening, or that there was something significant about that issue, and you charted on those specific areas, anywhere from a minimum of 1 up to as many as were pertinent at the end of your shift. So let's have a look at an example. Again, I'm going to have you note the way that it is formatted in the PowerPoint notes, as this app has kind of moved lines and such. Do note that with my DAR chart, I've got my focus. At the front of the progress notes, where all of the list of nursing diagnoses were, it was the full nursing diagnosis, so ineffective breathing pattern related to respiratory muscle fatigue. But in the progress note, we were able to short it down just to the stem. Since there was only one column, my timing of the actual observations and actions are noted within the body. My data, notice that I've got both objective and subjective data combined together. My action are all of the actions and that the nurse has done, and that they're worded very, very concisely and briefly. And then my response, again, it's a collection of both objective and subjective data, and I'm going to sign and write my designation. Well, that's the end of this lecture. Do note in the written PowerPoint that there is a couple quick quizzes that are built in at the end of the PowerPoint, and the answers are down below in the section. So that's all. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.